planner working with me on the comprehensive plan process now for a little over 2 years. We've been doing this. We have made previous presentations to this group on our progress and the status of the project overall and whatnot. Today, we're going to show you a little bit more detail about how the plan is progressing, some of the recommendations that are coming out of it that pertain most closely to this commission and what it does. With that, I think we'll go ahead and start our presentation. We do have several places where we're hoping to have some interaction and discussion with you all about different topics we'll be presenting as well. So this won't be just all me up here droning on and on. It's you all for the next couple of hours. So again, today we're going to walk through the process we've come through so far briefly. We've already kind of covered that with you all before. Talk about how the plan is organized, the overriding elements like the vision statement and the goals, the big ideas coming out of the plan. We're going to talk to you and hopefully get some feedback from you all. That's kind of a new idea that we'd like to get some feedback from you on. An idea we're calling global development considerations. And the idea here is that we want to revise our development guidelines for the city to recognize the idea that different areas are different, that there is context within the city. There are urban areas, there are suburban areas, and we shouldn't have the same set of guidelines for each of those areas. So, but there are things we want to see everywhere. And those are our global development considerations. And we're going to walk through those with you all today and talk about if those are the right considerations. And then we're going to talk through an idea we have about how to address context in the comprehensive plan. And we have an approach outline that we would like to get your feedback on. And then the plan objectives, there are 2 chapters in the plan: quality development and development patterns that we think most closely align with what this commission is typically charged with doing. And so we wanted to walk through those 2 objectives in a little more detail with you all and get your feedback on those 2 drafts. There are 23 of those chapters overall, so it's really, really difficult to get through that quantity of information in any kind of meaningful way. So we thought we would focus in on those 2 objectives in particular. And then we'll cover next steps and talk about where we are in the process and how we're going to wrap this thing up. So next slide, I'll hand it over to Morgan.
Thanks, Gerald. Good morning, everybody. So the last time that we spoke with you, we gave a presentation to the City Plan Commission at a regular meeting, just giving some background information on the plan process, general organization that we're headed towards with the final product, and then some other elements like the Playbook database that we will be creating a little bit later in the process as a tool for people to use the plan, not just having the document online itself, but having a database as a tool that's searchable and people can use. And we also went over some draft recommendations that we had presented to our special sessions that we were doing, the public meetings. We wrapped up each of those general category areas. There was 4 of those: mobility, serviceability, livability, and visibility. We wrapped up those series of meetings by showing a few draft recommendations to give people an idea of what they can expect when the full draft plan comes out. We shared those with you all, and then we are going to have many more of those to share when it comes to the 2 objectives that we'll be going over today. So just to kind of remind you of the general process that we've been going through, the level of detail in terms of what we have been asking people and the tasks that we've been working on. It started out very general. We wanted to get feedback from the public to lay the base, the groundwork for the plan. And then we have moved into more specifics. So tell us what the issues are and then tell us more about those issues. Tell us how we can address those issues in your communities. The process began in late 2019, early 2020. We anticipated going out into the public and doing several months worth of direct public engagement before we got into our public meetings. But unfortunately, with the pandemic, of course, we had to turn everything online to our platform that we have been utilizing for the last 2 years. We have been able to go out into the public since then. We have been attending in-person events as much as possible with the help of our public engagement consultants. And so we've been trying to even the spread in terms of what we've been able to do online, making sure we can replicate that in person with those who may not have access to the internet as readily as some other people do. So after we went through all the public engagement, we went through our strategy sessions, our public meetings, staff has gone back for the last several months and we have been writing draft pieces of this plan. Like Gerald said, there's the 23 objectives. We've also got other pages such as background information, a summary of this process. So there'll be several elements that are going to go into this final product. And right now we are going through that draft text that we've been writing. We are refining it. We are sending it through several layers of review internally within the city departments, upper management, as well as working with our regional partners and our stakeholders, subject matter experts that we've been working with, just to make sure that everything is lining up with what they expected to see in the plan, what is feasibly able to be included in a plan like this, and if the goals and the recommendations are going far enough in what we need to achieve. So we're still hoping to bring the plan to council later this year for adoption. We'll be going through a second phase of our public engagement once the draft plan is ready to be released to the public, which we're hoping is going to be in the next couple of weeks here. We'll start releasing elements of the draft plan to the public for their review and their comment on our platform, the playbook.kcmo.gov website. That's where we'll be hosting the draft elements for people to review and to submit responses and comments on. We anticipate closing that somewhere around late October, maybe early November. And at that point, we will go through the refinement process of going through all that feedback and then bringing something back, a final document to the City Plan Commission and then eventually to council. So this is a general hierarchy of how we have built the plan. The top section there is the vision. That's going to be the statement of who we want to be, what we want the city to be, what kind of city that we want to be living in the next 20 years. What we believe in, we have big ideas. There are, of course, a multitude of subject matter areas and issues that this plan is going to attempt to address, but we have to have some kind of base idea of what the big things are that we need to be addressing in the most immediate, the biggest issues that are facing Kansas City. So the big ideas are really going to try and condense down all of the most significant elements that we've heard back from the public, the major issues that we need to be addressing most immediately. We have 10 goals for the plan. Those are going to outline our general direction of how we need to get or what we need to accomplish to get to the point where we are meeting our big ideas and our vision. The goals, we'll show you those in just a minute. Then we have our 23 objectives. That is where the meat of the plan is going to be living. Each of these objectives is going to cover a certain topic area. It will have some background information. It will have context that relates the issue to Kansas City directly. There will also be some other information such as potential benefits of accomplishing the directives of the objective. It will describe some metrics that we can track to see if we are accomplishing our goals. And really the important part of that is going to be the list of community supported actions. You're going to find a series of those in each of the objectives. There's going to be a range of those. There could be anywhere between 8 objectives to 20 something, or 8 recommendations to 20 something recommendations. Just depends on the subject matter area. Those community supported actions are coming from the feedback that we have gathered over the last 2 years, including the feedback that we have been gathering for the last decade in updating all 18 of our area plans. So these are going to be a summary of all of that feedback, all that engagement, but with also the lens from our community stakeholders, from our subject matter experts, from our department leaders, people who are telling us the nuts and bolts of how we need to achieve these things. And then finally, the implementation and metrics. Like I said, we're going to have metrics that are going to track us to see if we're actually accomplishing the goals that we've set forth for ourselves. The implementation is going to be done in a matrix that will show the invested stakeholders, possible financing options, the people that would be responsible for implementing that recommendation, information like that. So we'll start here. You've seen our vision statement before, but we have made a couple of tweaks to it. We've added a second statement there because we really wanted to make sure that the concepts of equity were fully ingratiated into every part of this comprehensive plan. We wanted to state it right out front there. So we as Kansas Cityans envision our city as a vibrant, equitable, just, inclusive, welcoming, and thriving community where we consider people first by empowering members of the community to shape their environment. And we've also added, since the last time that we met, we acknowledge and will address past and current inequities by fostering equitable community and economic development that supports all residents with opportunities for a high quality of life. And here we have our goals. You have seen these before. We haven't made any changes since the last time that we met. So I won't read all of these to you because I know we have a lot of discussion to get to. But generally, these are going to try and cover all of the topic areas that the comprehensive plan can address, which is going to be from a lens of what physical development do we want to see in the city? How can physical development affect the quality of life of people in the city and things like that? It all comes back to how we develop in the physical construct of the city. So like I said, we have our vision statement here. I'm just going to run through the organization of the plan real quick. So right up top there, we have the vision statement. And then we have our big ideas. We are going to get into these in a couple of slides here. So I'm just going to show you that these are our big ideas. I'll read them a little bit more detail in just a moment. We have our 10 citywide goal. These are just the shortened abbreviated titles for those goals, which those lead into those 23 objectives that we have with the recommended action items, those community supported action items, the recommendations of the plan. And we've highlighted here development patterns and quality development. Those are the two objectives that we will be giving you a preview of today with the draft recommendations that we have so far. There are other objectives on this list that likely relate directly to the work that you do on the commission. And we would be happy to share those with you as well once we've got them in a place to share the draft text. And all of that is going to create that implementation matrix that I discussed earlier, where it's going to identify the invested parties, financing, timeframes, all of those types of things. And so that is just the overall way that this plan is feeding into itself, that it is building upon the implementation matrix, but it's all coming from the vision and the big ideas that we have. So those big ideas, we have a set of 5 big ideas that try to speak to the most important things that we want to address with this comprehensive plan. So the first one, maximizing connections and mobility options by bridging or eliminating barriers and creating new physical connections and a robust multimodal transportation system. Second, creating a physically beautiful city by promoting high quality design in public spaces and buildings, private development and capital improvements. Third, respecting land as a limited resource by balancing outward growth with infill development, preserving natural resources, and developing in an equitable and sustainable manner. Fourth, creating a future-proofed city by better anticipating and reacting to emerging trends and new technology. And last, fostering neighborhoods that accommodate all ages, lifestyles, and incomes by diversifying and densifying housing choices and creating complete communities. So these are very broad statements, but they're getting into the details of the issues that we need to be addressing with this comprehensive plan. Yeah, sure.
And we're constantly looking for ways to boil this plan down to kind of its more basic elements. And so this is our latest attempt to turn a 23 chapter comprehensive plan into a 5-minute elevator speech, you know. So there's so much more in the plan as far as detail and other topics, but these are what we've kind of, in draft form anyway, I've isolated as like the big 5 ideas that we want to make sure come across and get communicated as part of what the plan is saying for the future of our city. And we'd really appreciate, and I know we just sprung this on you right now, but any thoughts you have about these 5 statements, about additional ideas that we should be thinking about as far as the big overall ideas for the future development of our city?
Stands out to me is the creating a future-proof city. I think it would be a nice place to talk about climate resiliency. That's also good.
I would agree, maximizing connections. I know there's been a lot of conversations about a regional transportation plan. You think about just 300 or 315 square miles, like how do we build connectivity throughout our city? So something that
Very good.
Sorry, I was a little late and I had it wrong on my calendar. I just wanted to say, I think the future-proof city is really important. I think better designing our suburban parts of town to not necessarily be just copies of the urban core, but of something that is more sustainable that provides that density of housing choices and also connections. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we deal with on City Planning Commission is that I feel like our suburban design is out of whack with kind of the values that we've been stating. And I think there's an opportunity to kind of revamp that to maintain that suburban lifestyle, but do it in a different way.
I think if Bruce was here, it's probably between respecting land and the reacting to emerging trends, but he would be saying, what about green sustainability? Like what ways are we thinking about not only just preserving our natural resources, but leveraging in them in a way that contributes to the built environment?
We can definitely integrate that idea into these big ideas a little bit more. The climate preservation and resiliency plan is very much integrated into the environmental health and resiliency objective that we have. We've been working very closely with them to make sure that their recommendations and their goals are tightly wound into this comprehensive plan as well.
So they're creating a beautiful, a physically beautiful city. I think Ashley and James are probably the most skilled at talking about like the design, but that's a space that I'm really interested in growing in because, you know, beauty, they say, is in the eye of the beholder. And sometimes when we see things, we're like, does it really align with the fabric of the community or the architectural like features? But I would really just, at a different time, just how do we factor that in as we want people to feel a sense of belonging when they traverse different spaces in our city?
Sometimes like durability isn't the most glamorous word, but that sometimes equates to beauty in some ways, because if quality material last, sometimes that is a little more objective, but also like lends itself to I think a nicer and more quality neighborhood. Other piece I would say, and I think you're implying this in your last statement. I'd love to see the word walkability in here somewhere. And I think that would, I don't know, my perspective is that walkability is important to all of those ages, lifestyles, incomes, whether you're in an urban environment or a suburban environment, you still want a place that you can walk around, have spaces for your kids to ride their bikes, etc. So I think that would be a piece that
I support that because one of the things when we think about the Health Commission with the lowest life expectancy zip codes, they often lack the infrastructure so that people can get out and walk as a way of just maintaining and protecting good health. So.
And we are going to begin to get into the idea of what is quality design, physically beautiful city things here in a moment that towards the end of this presentation. So.
Could I ask a little bit more on what creating complete communities is really talking about?
Sure. So that's really referencing kind of the 15-minute city idea where you have within that time distance of your house where you reside, all of the conveniences and needs and services that you need on a daily basis, ideally by walking, biking, transit. But certainly we're recognizing that automobile trips are still a big part of everybody's daily mobility needs as well. But that's the idea there, is that we create communities that have all of your necessities, you know, in that kind of convenient distance from where you live.
Okay, thank you.
And we have an entire chapter just about how to do that.
All right, with that, are there any other questions on that first part of that presentation?
I just had talked about going back out to the public after you get a certain, what does that mean? What are you going to do?
So
Is
once-
that just one meeting or is that several meetings with different?
It's probably initially it'll be rolling out elements of the draft online for review and comments. And so we'll have, we hope, a kind of a robust online conversation, but then we'll go out in the community. We haven't determined the exact number of meetings, but it'll be more than one. And I don't know, we'll try to hit most, all areas of the city and make sure we're getting good coverage that way as well. So, yeah.
To date, where have you gotten the most comments and what parts of the city are you getting a lot of input for this, and where are you really lacking input from what sections of the city?
Well, we got really good participation and sort of the downtown, midtown, Plaza Brookside, Waldo areas. And that was sort of the initial part of our public engagement process. We realized early on that that was the case and that we were missing a lot of our east side, a lot of our suburban communities as well were less engaged. And those are areas that are traditionally, I think, less engaged in a process like this than some other areas that are a little more engaged. So we hired a public engagement team to help us to solve that problem. And so the latter half of our public engagement process is really focused on trying to reach out and engage in those communities, suburban and east side communities as well. And so we have improved our engagement, I think, substantially in those areas. I don't think it's ever quite where we want it to be. And it's, there's you're always going to miss someone, and it's not anything necessarily we can do to make people engage, but we try to make those opportunities available and really emphasize those areas we're missing. Our mantra has been, who's not at the table right now, and that's what we've been trying to focus on, and not to devalue the people that are at the table, but just constantly trying to build our input and awareness and engagement. But I'd still say the suburban and those east side communities are where we see are less participation than other areas of the city. I think we are getting better at that. Yeah.
So if they decide now I can actually see some tangible document and have something to read there, do they still have time to maybe provide some input?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now before it's finalized. Okay.
And now it is tangible, right? So it's a little less nebulous about what it is they're talking about.
Some of us that don't see abstract,
Right.
we have to see lines and shapes and things and
Yeah.
absolutes. Sure. Right, Tyler? So yeah, it maybe, and hopefully we'll get more comments from folks or more input as we move forward from this moving forward here. And I just another comment. Mobility is a big thing for me. I understand the connectivity of neighborhoods, but transportation is certainly going to change a lot over the next 5-10 years. Just being prepared for that. It may not be cars anymore. Maybe a vertical takeoff type of vehicle, and being prepared for that. I mean, that's something that was presented at a conference I was at just a couple weeks ago, to be ready for that. Car sharing is another big thing, and having curb space, and being ready for that. There's a huge fight in California for curb space between those that are sharing cars and those that want their patrons to actually be able to park so they can go into their business and that kind of thing. And of course, I've made a comment before. Someday I'd like to have a golf cart and be able to ride around my neighborhood and go to my stores and whatever. I mean, the short distances and that kind of thing. I think it should be okay to be able to do that as long as I got the right lights and that. But it's an electric vehicle, small car, and it can take me wherever I need to go. Really, I'd like to just be able to do that sometime. It's just a thought,
And a hoverboard.
Yeah, hoverboard. Yeah, that'd be kind of cool too.
If we're talking about hoverboards now, I'll chime in. So when James is talking about neighborhoods in suburban areas showing more of a dense mix, so as opposed to having, townhomes over here, apartments over here, single family over here, I think ideally you'd like to see more of a mix. do you all think that that's just what the market creates in terms of what developers would do? Or is it that, I mean, occasionally we'll see in a larger project, all three types interacting or maybe more types. But if we're thinking about that corner grocery store, neighborhood facing retail, I was, a friend texted me that Wildway, which is a coffee pop-up, had 30 people lined up this Saturday, and there are four local coffee shops within a mile of that spot. So I think people are craving, that's, you know, the new sense of community. So in terms of creating more use density, is that something that you think the city can play a role in, or is it really just like the market doesn't, the developers aren't building that and we can't force their hand?
Well, the developers are the ones who are going to build it, but I do think we have a role, especially in our area planning, to identify those areas where we have an opportunity to densify. And I think that's a recommendation we make, and we'll show you today, is that we should be scouting out those places where we have an opportunity to do that, and making that recommendation, and maybe applying some zoning that helps achieve that in those areas that we identify through that area planning process that are appropriate. On the market side, you know, it's been a number of years. It's probably been 5 years now, but I saw a presentation at Mid-America Regional Council where they talked about walkable urban communities, and there was a presenter there who made the claim. This is not my claim. This is just what I was hearing, is that if we built every housing unit in that walkable urban format for the next couple of decades, we still will not have met the demand. And that's if we build all of them that way, right? So I don't know what the developers are responding to, but I think there is an unmet need or unmet market for that kind of housing, and even in suburban areas. Sure. So
Thanks. And related to that, as you are going through the rest of the presentation, if you wouldn't mind, when it makes sense, to kind of point out what you think will have the greatest impact in terms of the, you know, private market, in terms of, because sometimes when I'm reading these different ideas, I have a hard time understanding if, you know, a change is going to loosen the reins so that, you know, the private industry can develop in a different manner, or if it's something that the city is kind of has their hands tied behind their back and it's like, well, we can only do so much.
sure, we'll do. Yeah.
So I'm curious, you know, always suffer from the fact that our city is so large and people feel as if it's spread out, and back to kind of climate resilience, don't value agricultural land hardly at all. And so the amount of agricultural land that we're eating up to spread out, and then the amount of cost it takes for us to get around. And I would love to go in a golf cart too. That would, so it's like, you know, it's sort of, it's not feeding our needs and then it's also leading to lack of resiliency in the long term when that agricultural. My question, and I don't expect you to answer it, but it's just, how do we try to focus our attention to key areas instead of trying to make the next big thing down the road, and you end up from the retail that's a couple miles away and net zero or development.
We do have some recommendations about how to begin to achieve that, and in our development patterns objective, which is one of the two that we wanted to talk with you all today about. So it's a big answer to your question, you know, but through how we invest in infrastructure or don't invest in infrastructure, or how we direct those investments to encourage or balance better with infill development as opposed to outward growth. And we're not saying outward growth is bad in our plan for sure. We're just saying that it should happen in a sustainable and equitable way, contiguous to existing developed areas and logical and efficient extensions of infrastructure, while we're also reinvesting in our areas that are in need of infill investment. And also, it's kind of a vague answer to your question, but those are kind of the ideas that embodied within this comprehensive plan so far.
So Gerald, I have a question on keeping me straight on, these are what we want the city to embody, but this is separate from what our actual building code and process is currently. Are we making suggestions to improve the process from this? Are we just looking at what could actually be built? Did that
Yes,
make
we
sense
are.
to you?
Go ahead.
Did that make sense what I'm trying to ask?
I think so. And yes, we are making recommendations about how to improve existing processes, investment decisions, codes, all of those things related to development to help us achieve these ideas of a sustainable and equitable development pattern. And we may be able to answer some of those questions, but once we get into that objective and begin to walk through some of our recommendations. And we also want your feedback about what's missing from those recommendations and what else should we be thinking about as well. That might help eliminate some of the uncertainty about what we are or are not saying. And we'll get there and towards the end of this presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was good conversation. Thank you all.
And Gerald's going to be taking it from here for a little while. So,
All right. So this next section is about our development guidelines and how we develop a system of development guidelines to help you all in decision making, to help staff in making recommendations about how we shape development. We've developed what we call a list of global development considerations, which are things we would like every development to use or incorporate. And this could evolve into something like a development checklist for staff, for developers, for you all. It's structured right now as a list of questions that does your development include these things? And this is derived from Focus had a thing called Quality Places to Live and Work guidelines. So we've taken those, we've taken our recent area planning recommendations, we've taken all the public input we've gotten over the last 2 years, we've taken our own professional expertise and developed this list of what we're calling, again, global or universal development considerations that we think we should begin to incorporate into all of our development review processes once this plan is adopted and then moving forward. So again, these are things we want to see everywhere, regardless of context. And we do think this would become sort of a checklist that we could incorporate perhaps in the staff reports that we submit to CPC or just in our development review process, something we could give to developers to look at as they're designing their site, things like that. So this is kind of a precursor to the idea of context where we have different guidelines for different areas. We wanted to start by talking to you all about the guidelines we want everywhere. So this is the first beginning of our list of development considerations that we want to see everywhere. And I'll just sort of read through these briefly, and then we would like, I think, to have your feedback and discussion about these as well. So we want to have, and we'd like also to restructure these so that they're not questions, but they're statements about what we want to see in a development, not does your development include these things. But what we would like to have are developments that don't create or perpetuate social or physical barriers. We want to see developments that enhance safety and inclusiveness for people of all ages and abilities. We want to be sure that our developments are embracing and integrating with surrounding neighborhoods, and they're not overly inwardly focused or creating barriers for entry or connectivity to adjacent areas. We want to make sure developments are adding value to the character of the surrounding area, not detracting from the character or even the desired character. Maybe it's not an existing character, but it's a character that we're aspiring to create in a certain area. We want to make sure that our neighbors and districts have distinct and identifiable character. We like the idea of mixed use and increasing housing diversity. We want all of our developments to be kind of thinking about how they can help us achieve that throughout the city. Affordable opportunities for affordable housing, particularly near transit and employment centers, would be important as well. But again, the idea of having a certain level of affordability in all areas of the city. Next slide. And not every development will have all of these elements, right? Some of them just don't apply, but we want to have a consistent set of questions or considerations that each development would have. Improving access to daily needs, especially in what we're calling here equity priority areas. I think we talked about the Life X zip codes earlier. Those are those kinds of areas that are historically distressed or historically underrepresented areas, or that are in particular need of those access to those daily needs. And that's that complete community or 15-minute city idea we were talking about earlier. We want to make sure that it's incorporating all modes of travel, safe and convenient access for all of those, including and maybe emphasis on walking, biking, and transit. We want to make sure our streets are connected, a high level of connectivity, that they're not overbuilt, that they're adequate, allowing for adequate public safety as well as traffic volume. But again, that connectivity, or establishing a minimum level of connectivity through street connections. We want to make sure our historic landmarks and resources are being reused and refurbished. We want to make sure that our development is occurring either in infill sites or areas that are contiguous to existing developed areas, and that we're using our existing infrastructure efficiently. We want to create or preserve open space. We want to respect our existing topography and minimize the impact our developments are having on our natural environment. We want to make sure that developments are including public spaces that are well designed and programmed and activated. And you mentioned durability earlier. This is kind of our durability statement, that our development and infrastructure is designed to be useful for 100 years or more. And that's actually something that came straight out of our focus plan, but that's that idea there. And I think that is all of our global development considerations. We'd be interested in any of your feedback or reactions or thoughts about what might be missing from that list as well.
So could I just say that in reading that list, I felt like you've been in some of our meetings, because I believe quite a few of those are things that we all look at from a personal standpoint when we're asking questions. So I'm excited to see this because I feel we've been on point already. So thank you for the list.
Good. Glad to hear that. Thanks, Forrest.
I just wanted to point out, I think one thing that gets lost about the character aspect is the interplay between both the housing, the transportation, and then also, more importantly, the commercial spaces in and around neighborhoods. Because I think where I live in Waldo, like all those commercial spaces, beautiful or not, have a culture included in them, in stores and restaurants that people love. And I think we recently saw a case where they just kind of want to put up pad sites in a suburban neighborhood, and I saw a great potential, but it didn't really match kind of what I thought would be appropriate. So I think as we kind of go through this, I think it's important to highlight some of our most successful areas of town have this character that's both housing and also the commercial and retail and restaurants nearby. And I think my other point is we should really, I've become a bike lane guy lately, but we should really be putting bike lanes in like almost every neighborhood. I want to get an electric bike, but I also don't want to die. So it's like this challenge of wanting to do something that would be awesome for yourself, but also the safety of it. So I think on enhancing safety and inclusiveness for people and also modes of transportation, we should be really looking at that, especially as e-bikes are becoming more and more affordable and can get you to places like a golf cart, right? So those are my 2 points, but this is a great list. It's comprehensive, and I think it does what it needs to.
From a procedure standpoint, somebody brings in a project and that they want to do, this list is going to be applied to that project. And is there a pass fail, or is it all or none, or sir?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever a yes or no or a pass fail. It's and we'll have to determine how we how or if we score it, or if it's just kind of a staff will go through and assess whether how well each development does or does not include these things, and then come up with a recommendation to you all about how to move forward. Sometimes it's maybe just a matter of, it's not a yes or no, it's you should think about adding these things,
Sure. Maybe it's something that can be handed to them or out there available that I guess it will be as part of the overall plan, but just a snapshot kind of thing, some considerations as part of your development.
And I think your guys' feedback on that question, what you want to see and how you want it applied, and my staff are presenting or providing a staff report, is part of what we're interested in hearing from you all.
I'd just add to, as we talk about putting this into the process, I think it would be good as this gets further developed for staff to lay out some strategies, right, for developers as they kind of come through the process, or they get familiar with project after project, of like, how do you actually do some of these things? Because I think one of the challenges is some of these developers just kind of put the same thing down over and over and over again, which is fine for their business, but I don't think it really achieves our larger goals. So if there's ways that you can kind of show them how to do it, and not necessarily specifically for their site, but give examples, I think that would be super helpful, or ways to implement this that would achieve these goals that can range from a low cost to high cost to easy to hard to, I don't know, just it would be interesting to kind of see what that would, and I think these kind of strategies are in our area plans, and will probably be in here, but kind of having it in a consolidated place for developers and people who are building things would be helpful.
To add to that, I think each one of these probably has a visual that's associated with it, whether it's a diagram or some examples of a previous project that characterize that. But I think that done that in previous plans where it's like
Sure.
this, not this. I think that would be really helpful in this context. The other thing I wanted to add, and it's sort of mentioned in this last one, but I might add, we've had projects that come in that are industrial projects. And I know that I weigh those really heavily towards how many jobs are those bringing, and that becomes a big impact on what we're willing to deviate from, or any other kind of, that would be. It starts to speak to a question I have on how does this interact with the economic development conversation, and conversation I've thought would be helpful is for developers to have a similar criteria. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but similar criteria between the conversations that we're having, and then when they go over and talk to the EDC, that there's some sense that policy are carrying in both courts. I don't know if this is something that could be text in discussions as well. I know they have their own scorecards and things, but.
So Joseph, once again, you were saying that staff was looking for our input of what to bring to us with a project. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, I mean, Kobe asked, is this going to be like a yes, no? Like, how will staff evaluate these bullet points that are on your screen? And I think whether that's a yes, no, or narrative, or how we respond to that, we're looking for your feedback on that, as we go through this. And I think they'll get to a lot more information either today or at subsequent work sessions that will answer a lot of the questions being raised. But what I'm interested in particular is how you want us to respond to some of these things, so that we can develop some of the strategies you're talking about.
So personally, trying to think back on some of our previous projects, I get the sense that we focus on just the project boundaries. And there's been discussion of connectivity as far as streets going from within into the other surrounding communities. I think I would like to see staff expand their view on how this project that they're bringing affects that connectivity and the surrounding neighborhoods.
Mhm.
Those discussions come up, when it's presented from commissioners asking questions. But I think it would be helpful if we had an overview of how this project really affects that. How do I want to say this? Mobility, integration of moving and combining new neighborhoods with existing areas.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and that's what all
Okay.
these bullet points are really referencing is it's not just the property in question, it's everything around it and
Yeah.
how they connect to one another.
And I think to go to some of James's points, when it's commercial around a community, a residential community, I would go to the discussions we've had on projects along, is it Berry Road and 150, is it 150 up north and 152 out south? But I know Kobe has brought in points because that's his area that we may not even look at because he's familiar with it. So if staff could pull in not only residential projects, but those commercial projects and how they affect the surrounding communities a little more in depth would be helpful. And they've done that. I'm thinking of that one particular one where we talked about a stoplight really needed to be there for the ease of in and out egress from the parking lots and stuff for that commercial development. Those are the kind of things I think I'd like to see more of from staff.
I'll add two thoughts. I think these are great. We had a case last week where, in my personal opinion, we kind of used a different set of standards for the project because of some of the things it was achieving in terms of where it was, the type of infill, et cetera. And while I think the process worked because I think it was in most people's interest to see the project pass, and it did get passed. I do think that if it was evaluated based upon these type of criteria, then it would allow for follow-on investment because other developers could say, look, this is the type of project that kind of gets evaluated slightly differently because of these different goals it's achieving. And then instead of just having one project in a vacuum succeed, it might also allow for other people to continue to develop in a certain area if they know it's going to achieve certain goals that you all have laid out. And then on the exact opposite end of that spectrum, I think that if these are to make these stronger as they stand now, I think it would be helpful to add something that explicitly calls out the exceptions. And somehow, I don't know exactly how that's done, but I think a lot of the projects we see are the ones that require, variances or are non-conforming in some way. And I think that these, again, are stronger if they also add something that says, these are the types of projects that don't fit. And we understand why an industrial project out here might not need the same type of connectivity or the same type of long-term bike storage or short-term bike storage or something like that. That's probably a poor example. But again, I think that if I were to try to criticize these, it would be, well, there are too many different exceptions. And so if you kind of call out the exceptions in some way or in a very broad general way, note that there are exceptions, I think it makes it easier to point to these as valid and worthwhile.
Tyler, I think that's super critical. That was one of my things. I think there are points that we don't do well that might deserve after this moves on, or maybe it's a separate initiative, but to look at those exceptions and look at how we could better, whether it's industrial areas. I'm even thinking about on one of the questions was about like public spaces. I think we try to do it well, but it just costs a lot of money to upkeep parks and upkeep all these things. And it's not necessarily doesn't feel like it feels like it could be exponentially better. So maybe there's like points that are, and then also manufacturing or logistics hubs, which is a huge thing in Kansas City, which I think what we've kind of struggled with on how to make better within the existing code. So maybe there's some things that the staff can kind of identify that are either areas of significant improvement or areas that are unique to Kansas City that we might have more of, that might need a little bit deeper dive on how we address those challenges.
I don't know if it's tangential to this, but as I think about the playbook and then just new development, I'm also wondering, like, how do we address like this, what do you call it? The spot zoning, right? So it's like, if we don't change it, it will allow to continue and continue. So are there just areas where we can say, or some priorities around, this does not, add to the fabric or the zoning? How do we start to rectify areas where that is happening?
Another thing that I don't know how to address, but has come up before, want to evaluating a project that was in what I would consider an industrial area at first glance. And the project, I think, had pretty high truck traffic, but my limited understanding of that area, and that's another thing, to have a limited understanding of Kansas City. And I kind of said, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's in an industrial area. And I just remember somebody in the comment, there's a park there and there's some kids that play soccer or football there every week. And I thought, whoa, like, and that made me think, what kind of evaluation can we apply to some projects to just make sure that those intersections happening? A ton of data around environmental justice issues and where those kind of health hazards are placed. Though we've gotten a lot cleaner in our industrial, like the truck traffic is still going to be an issue. And so I don't know what that looks like. And I know some cities take that to the nth degree and it becomes cumbersome process, frankly, to get through environmental review and things. But I think that that's something we should start to think about, is how can we think about air quality and noise and things, relationship in particular to industrial.
So can I piggyback on what Ashley just said? Because it made me start thinking of projects like the West Bottoms and out at the old, the modal system out south, used to be the air base. How do some of these things apply to those types of developments? Because as I'm thinking, I'm like, I'm not seeing a real fit here.
So how would we apply these development considerations to a place like the Richards Gebauer area?
Yes, yes. And then the West Bottoms, as it's developing into residential mix.
Right. So that's one reason to have our area plans up to date, is to recognize when those transitions are happening. Like our more recent Greater Downtown Area Plan tries to, I think, does recognize and begins to delineate, in the West Bottoms example in particular, where it's industrial is good to remain, at least in the foreseeable future, and those areas that we think should or already are transitioning into more of a mixed use development, and providing some guidance on how you avoid those conflicts inherent to having industrial next to people walking in the street, things like that. So so that's one way that we do it. We also do have and will have in our development guidelines guidance for how we deal with transitions when you have higher intensity uses located next to lower intensity uses, and how you address or how do you mitigate some of those other factors we talked about as well. So so I think it's thinking about those areas in advance and delineating them within an area plan, and then having the right set of guidelines to address those, which we're trying to develop now. I think those two things work together to help us steer development in these industrial areas. And if you're looking at this global development checklist, you may not have many of these that apply to a logistics center or a Richards Gebauer intermodal facility. It's just you have to take it on a case by case basis.
So I
And
guess
we can
that's what
provide-
I'm kind of asking you, though, Bo, is were those types of areas considered when we were looking, or you were looking at this list?
Yes, I think we did. And
Okay.
I think we continue to look at how we can address those areas through these global development considerations. So I think that's sort of something we've heard loud and clear from you all today that we can go back and put a finer point to.
Okay. Because I'm thinking I'm not sure what the area officially is called, but we have pockets of industrial on the east side. And we have up north, I was thinking close to Worlds of Fun, we had a project come that we did not approve. So yeah, there are pockets that we still need to look at for industrial type area development.
Yeah, we do have 6 distinct industrial areas throughout the city.
Okay.
And
Are we
and-
currently doing the Blue River? Is that going to be an addition, or is that already considered one, Kobe?
It's the Blue Valley Industrial Area. So that's
Yeah.
south of the Missouri River, west of 435. And
Yes.
that area is heavily industrial and it's under a process or planning to, redevelop the whole thing. And that's also where the port is looking to put their intermodal facility, is in that area as well,
Okay.
being prepared for that. And then you have the Northeast, which is on the north side of the Missouri River.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Front Street, both sides of that.
Yeah.
We have to make sure, we cater to them too. Because those areas are very important to the city, all 6 industrial areas, West Bottoms being another one. They provide a lot of jobs, a lot of capital for the city.
Mhm.
But it's important to make sure we take care of them.
We're going to talk to the KCIC this Thursday morning. So
Exactly. Yep. I'll see you there.
see you there.
One last thing, if anyone wants, there's coffee in the back. Help yourself.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I just wanted to say that I think that Commissioner Beasley's points are well taken. These questions are meant to provide a guide that gets us to that quality development across the entirety of the city. These are the elements of quality development that we just want to see everywhere. It is going to be a little bit different for certain specific projects, certain specific areas, but I think that leads into the next section of our presentation here, which is going to talk about context and form. And then we can use that secondary step of development review to help us identify those areas where maybe a few of these questions don't directly apply, but we still have other considerations that are going to take in the adjacent communities, the area that project is in, into consideration as well.
So I will go ahead and move to those. And thank you again for the good discussion on the global development considerations. And the next level down from the global is how we deal with different contexts. And so right now we have our development form guidelines in our area plan set up around 4 area types. That's the corridor, node, district, and neighborhood. And we have guidelines, specific guidelines for each of these 4 areas. If it was an industrial area, for instance, it would be called a district, and we would have and we do have a specific set of guidelines for those areas. But what we're recognizing is that, and we have the same guidelines throughout the city, and we think we need to change that to recognize different contexts. And what we're proposing is that there are 4 basic contexts throughout the city. The downtown, which is kind of where we are now, what we're calling urban, suburban, and rural. You mentioned our agricultural lands earlier, and we do have within our city limits, we have those rural areas, right? So we think that for each of those 4 development form typologies, corridor, node, district, and neighborhood, you will have a different set of guidelines depending on which of those 4 contexts you are within. So you're going to have a different neighborhood set of guidelines if you're an urban or downtown than you will if you're a suburban or rural area of the city. We don't have those guidelines yet, but this is one thing we want to talk through you all with is about this approach and if this is the right path forward. This certainly our recommendation at this point is to include this idea in the comprehensive plan. Probably though would follow up the comprehensive plan process immediately by actually writing these guidelines, just because we think it deserves its own process. But we would set the framework as much as we can with as much detail as we can within the comprehensive plan so that it can guide that process when the plan is adopted. So our intent is to take these development form guidelines, which now reside in every area plan, has its own set of development form guidelines, to elevate those up to the comprehensive plan. So that's the only place they are. And then we can take those out of the area plan documents and we're just refer to the Casey Spirit Playbook.
Yeah, and if under context, unless you think it's too duplicitous because it's in district, I think adding industrial would just add clarity. If context.
Sure.
I would second that. I think that's one thing we struggle with is how do we address development that might have requirements that are a little bit different. I would just highlight, I think node is probably, in my mind, some of the most critical for the citywide development, because I think there's some people have this mindset that everyone's going downtown for work and coming home, right? And that's not the reality. They're either working from home or they're going to work close by in these nodes of offices or commercial or businesses or industrial, right? And so I think kind of how do we develop these nodes to be more inclusive and opportunities? One thing I wanted to ask too is if there is like, I'm thinking specifically of Martin City, right? And all the development going down there. And it feels like the markets has some pressure, but it feels like we have to play catch up to support that development. And so I was wondering if there's a way or if there's other precedents in other cities to where if an area receives so much capital investment or so many new jobs, like could that trigger like a review of an area plan to better support that growth and to make it less contentious? Because I think that's one of the challenges is we see almost like $100 million going in down near Martin City with new jobs, and they're looking to recruit all the way from Clinton, Missouri. And it just feels like we could respond better to those type of investments in our areas. So those are my two thoughts.
Those are good. And I think development pressures in places that are experiencing an infusion of a massive amount of investment or capital, I mean, that's always one of the factors we use in prioritizing what areas are due for an update or a review in our area planning process. And I think we would like to emphasize how important it is to continuously update those area plans to make sure they're fresh and responding to current pressures and things that are happening as well. So, yeah.
Pulling this out gives you probably less burdensome.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
As much as we can streamline between the area plan and the comprehensive plan, it's definitely one of our goals here.
So we've kind of talked through this already, but the idea here is that our development typologies shouldn't be one size fits all, that we have different contexts. They're applied alongside the global development considerations you guys have already seen. These two things work together, and they're used by us, by you all, by development applicants, all of us working together to use these guidelines to ensure we have quality development in Kansas City. Next slide. I'm going to let Morgan explain our graphic here.
So Mr. Williams unfortunately wasn't able to be with us today. He was going to walk through these graphics. They give a visual representation of all of these textual elements that we're kind of walking you all through. So you've got the pyramid, the hierarchy of the plan, how everything kind of builds on top of each other. So the way that we see this happening is those global development consideration questions, the ones that apply to the entirety of the city to try and see quality development across all areas of the city, going to work in conjunction with those quality design elements. So what is the form of the area, what is the context that the development is occurring in, and how can those guidelines, which we will write eventually, how can those create quality development? So the objectives is going to be where those global considerations and those context and typologies will live, where that guidance will live. And that is going to help inform and update how we do the development review path, how we utilize those tools, those considerations to, I don't know if it'll be a scoring system or if it's going to be a narrative of some type that staff will put together. But it will affect the way that we review cases to try and take more of those global quality design, context, and form considerations into that review process. So the community supported actions are going to outline that process, how we can incorporate it into our reviews. And then when we are able to adopt a comprehensive plan, we'll come back with specific guidelines and expand on those processes. In our implementation and metrics, as long as we're following that path to the development review path is updated and what we're reviewing, it's going to lead to built sites and structures that are meeting the implementation measures that we've set for ourselves. So it's a little bit complicated, but hopefully everything is kind of feeding into the next step, the next level of review, the next level of implementation. So it's all working together to create a livable and equitable Kansas City. And just another example, visual example of how this would work. Those global considerations, that's kind of where you would start. You'd start with those key questions that want to inspire quality development across the entirety of the city. The next thing that we would do, preferably developers would be doing this on their end too, to evaluate their own projects before coming to CPC and submitting. But staff would also be looking at these determinants that we've been discussing. So we would determine what context and what form those projects are falling within. And then on the right-hand side, you see a matrix. We would determine, are you suburban? And you're a district. So that therefore you would need to meet the guidelines that we will be writing for suburban and for district areas. We would use that matrix to supply those recommendations to the developer and let them know that that is the guidance that staff will be providing based on the particular community and the area that they are trying to develop in. So once those recommendations, those guidelines are supplied to the developer, we would also take a look at site-specific recommendations. So that is going to relate to other city policies, other determinants that the city has that apply specific requirements to a development project. So things like that would be buffer areas around water systems. It would include the trails plans, bike plans, street plans, all the other city plans that the city works within. That's going to be another level of site-specific recommendations, because those plans do have specific areas that they're looking at. They have specific streets, specific trail areas that they want to see or they want to see improvements on. So we want to make sure that we're incorporating all of those recommendations as well into this process. And then all of those steps, all of those reviews, all of that is going to create a site-specific set of guidelines for a project that's going to take into consideration not just the global questions of making quality development in Kansas City, but it's also taking into consideration the context, the form the project is taking place within, and then also those site-specific recommendations from all the other city plans. So it'll create a big set of guidance that we can apply to these development projects. And with that, we will take any questions or comments that you may have on these context and form typologies, setting up this structure to eventually create a tool that will have development guidelines that go along with them. Okay.
See a lot of nodding in agreement.
We like to see nodding. All right.
I know somebody mentioned coffee earlier. I don't know if you guys need to take a break or refresh your coffee cups. We have 2 sections left to talk you through. Dive right in, or
I am a coffee, so I will, but no need to stop.
How about we take a quick 5 and everybody can refresh their beverages, run to the
Let's do
restroom?
that.
All
Take
right.
5 minutes here.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Well, I was thinking about it because,
Yes.
coffee here, I was like,
So
just haven't figured out my timing.
Sure.
I've been
Yes.
late both times, but I realized I can just stop and grab coffee on the way. We'll just start doing that.
Oh my.
Not making any promises on quality.
Playing with him today. I need the copy book between drop off and getting here,
Yeah,
like no time.
yeah.
So, but they have some, but there's no way to keep it warm. And I hate to sound like a coffee diva, but it's like,
You gotta get one of those little things that you
Yeah.
plug in.
I'm gonna have to. I have a cup that, it's like an Ember, EMBR. You
Oh.
can set the time with the app, but you know, I don't want to show up here with my own cup and I have that.
With the app.
Yeah,
That's
that's.
like-
Yeah, it has that warm, all that.
Okay,
Yeah,
keeping you
I mean,
busy.
because I can't imagine they don't actually have one. That seems like something they just didn't include.
It's an eve.
You are? Oh,
Yeah.
Later.
Time to forget there's other.
Getting used to that.
it's cold.
I'm hurt. You. It's in Matrix.
Well, that's gonna be both of those things. Well, I guess the one for the plausible should be that controversial, I don't think. I don't know. I mean, they're just coming up with criteria. Oh, I do too. Oh, I do too. Yeah, definitely. But I mean, it's like, how can you,
No butcher. Yeah.
they can object, but I think they're gonna look a little silly objecting to that. I mean, it's not. There should be standards, right? I mean, there should be some, they can object, but. I almost don't either. I mean, I was just sent to me, it's like, and I, you know, part of me was thinking, oh, I should just think something, and I was like, it's fine. Because what I would have probably suggested is, well, why don't we just treat this like a variance, use the variance standard? Why are you coming up with such a- But because there's not gonna be any case law to interpret this, because they just need to know where she got it from. I think we did it. It's like, I kind of felt a letter.
Was they all?
Even if council's making the decision, at least we to rely on. I may suggest that, but it's as long as there's something.
But
But-
when I glanced at it, that's all I saw. And I don't, there's.
No, there is. There isn't.
This-
So
It seems so daunting to get this thing done, doesn't it?
Expanding the boundaries.
all right, it's been about 5 or 6 minutes. Whenever everyone has an opportunity to make their way back, that would be great, and we can wrap this up.
I'll go get him in a minute. Looks like Kobe is.
Who's on? But at this historic one, I'm starting to get.
Yeah, she is. Have to leave you.
This property owners.
Probably tandem.
She's gonna fight us, and she'll like,
Do your coffee.
I mean, isn't it a rezoning? Cause I'm thinking it is.
It says it should follow in a different section.
No.
Within the overlay provision was a very detailed process for how to do it.
No, it's gonna happen to me.
So I gotta have that.
Process.
Yeah, maybe we can argue that.
So Commissioner Baker and Commissioner Beasley, you both available? Back?
We're here.
Okay. I think we have almost everybody back here. So let's go ahead and reconvene the meeting and continue on. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first objective we're going to walk you through is called quality development, and it talks about many of the things we just talked about: our global development considerations, our design guidelines, our context guidelines. All of that conversation happens within this objective. So this has a lot to do with how we shape development. A lot of our zoning recommendations happen in here, in development code ideas as well. So this overview sentence here talks about how that our city's built environment should be rooted in quality design principles based on best practices contributing to the overall desirability of the community. New development should be compatible with the desired character, maybe not the existing character, but the aspired to character of an area, of its neighborhoods, corridors, districts, and nodes. Next slide. So what we're going to walk you through here, and keep in mind, these two objectives we're going to show you are still drafts, haven't been fully reviewed internally with management here in City Hall even. So this is kind of a sneak peek for you all. We will be, once we complete that internal review, releasing these to the public for their review as well. And what we're showing you here are, I think there are 13 of these community supported actions. Each of these has several sub bullets that we're not showing you here, but there's a lot more detail in the document itself. We're trying to hit kind of the high points for you all today, because it is all in draft form partly, but also just in the interest of time. So these community supported actions are our recommendations, and they come from our area plans. They come from the focus plan. They come from other city planning documents. They come from the public that we've been working with for over 2 years now. Things we heard from them and from you all, from our empowerment committee as well. Just from best practices, we have done a little bit of review of what some other cities do related to all of these different topics as well. So all of those things kind of get synthesized into these community supported actions, which are our list of recommendations. These will be put into a database just for your information. That's searchable, filterable by a number of different factors and keywords and topics and things like that. So I will have that functionality will be available on our website as well. And each of them will have this kind of unique identifier, this QD one that tells you what objective it's in and how to identify it if you need to get there quickly. So anyway, with that, our first community support action for quality development talks about updating our development forum guidelines, which is what we just talked to you all about, using those quality development considerations, creating context sensitive guidelines. That's action number one for our quality development, and then incorporate them into the development review process. So first part is just creating the guidelines, and the second part is integrating that into the development review process. Global development considerations is number two, incorporating those in all new development, establishing perhaps, as we said, a checklist, or at least using it as a way for staff, developers, for you all to evaluate things that we want to see everywhere in development projects. Adopting new development standards for all areas and establishing a minimum level of design quality. So the idea there is that instead of having guidelines that are somewhat flexible and negotiable, we would convert some of those things we think are most important into actual development code requirements, and not have that be something that's up for discussion. You know, there's some discretion about. And that's something we can work through, hopefully, as we're developing those guidelines with you all and with others, the city council as well, to decide what should remain a guideline and what might warrant being elevated to a development code requirement. Creating additional standards for, instead of those minimum standards for quality, we want those areas with distinctive character. We want to have those additional standards through overlay zonings or special character districts. And those would be identified again through the area plan process. We would identify where those areas are and then have a process to implement those overlay zones as they're identified. Our hope is that with a lot of those that we don't create what we're calling bulk customization, that we don't have 50 different character overlays, that we have some that are somewhat movable, that they apply to other areas that have similar characteristics as well. Ensuring that we have appropriate base zoning is another one of our actions. Again, this is an area plan task, a land use planning task, but identifying those areas where we have a big mismatch in the intended development of an area and the existing zoning on the ground, and trying to do something to rectify that through fixing the base zoning. That's not creating any new overlay zones or special character districts. It's just establishing the correct base zoning in an area. And then we want to think about how we might incent quality design. So this is kind of the carrot and the stick idea here, is that if we're going to talk about quality design, we should probably be thinking about how we would incent developers to achieve that. Next slide.
And do you feel like
Yeah.
those incentives, like you have developers asking that, is that something you?
No, short answer, but I think we'd have to have a conversation with the development community to see what would be an incentive enough, you know, what are the things they're really looking for. And it may not be any of the things we have listed here, or it might be, but that would have to be a conversation we'd have with it. Slide. Sensitive uses are something we've talked a lot about in our area plans, and how to manage those and mitigate the impacts of those in a particular area, make sure they're not too overly concentrated in a specific area as well. And we have some examples of what those are here, but that's kind of a recurring theme we've heard through our area planning process over the last 10 to 15 years that we've elevated up to the comprehensive plan. We have, I think, a good public engagement process in our development review process, but this is just sort of an ongoing, continue to look for ways, looking at what other cities are doing, new techniques, new innovations that we can incorporate into our public engagement process. We don't specifically know what those are. This is just kind of something to keep thinking about over the next, because this is a 20-year plan. We want to be able to think about these things for a while. Encouraging and increasing density and compact mixed-use development throughout the city. And this, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but again, this is an area plan directive that where we would go in and identify those areas that are where there's an opportunity for increased density, where there's an opportunity to convert something that's not compact into a compact mixed-use development if it fits the area. So that's something we would do initially through area planning, is identifying where these are, and then maybe coming in with some development code requirements that help implement that idea. I think number 10 is similar to number 9, in that we probably also, in those compact mixed use areas, we want those to be walkable developments as well. And so that's the same kind of idea. And 11, I would say as well, is somewhat repetitive there. So sorry. So I think 9, 10, 11 are all kind of the same ideas, that we want to increase density, mixed use, walkable development throughout the city, wherever it makes sense, wherever we can. And that we'll use zoning tools and the area planning processes to figure out where those are most appropriate. Slide. Implementing TOD specifically is another one of our quality development CSAs. And that's, looking at our transit corridors like we are right now along the Prospect Corridor for opportunities to establish transit supportive land use patterns, transit supportive mobility infrastructure, and things of that nature. So this would be the idea to expand zoning overlay districts. The closest TOD zoning overlay we have right now is the Main Street overlay that we put in place, in anticipation of the streetcar, that we would use perhaps in other transit corridors as well throughout the city. And then the last one here actually has, I think, a lot of ideas attached to it that may not be displayed here, but thinking about challenges, obstacles, if you will, to infill development throughout the city. They may exist in our development code, and how we can minimize or reduce those issues by reviewing the development code to see where those challenges occur and try to mitigate or remove those. And I know we're doing some of that work now. Joe's group is, so I just continue to try to make infill development as feasible and with few hurdles as possible. Happy to take any questions or comments or thoughts you have on any of those 13. Yes, sir.
I have one question. It hasn't come up yet. Maybe it will in a little bit down the road, but how are you addressing gentrification?
Yeah, so we don't have it in the presentation today, but we do have an entire.
Fit right into that. I think question 13.
Yeah, I think it does as well. We will talk about it. We have an entire objective about eliminating disparities throughout the city, specifically displacement due to gentrification and things of that nature. So we are thinking about equitable land use and zoning issues for sure. And we can certainly
Will you be taking
emphasize that.
into account the fact we all like all these beautiful buildings, beautiful housing, and all these new developments and stuff. But in gentrification, the cost and effect of say $1 million or more house next to a house, if for example, like mine is 100 years old or more, the effects of this nice, beautiful place, and mine is beautiful too. This older stock also has a lot of character and beauty, Victorian or whatever style may be.
I think we can add some language that
Talking about the effects of a nice place, what it does to say an older person on fixed income, having a place, say having a house that's worth more than close to $2 million right next to you.
Yeah. I
Tax
think
base, I'm saying,
I think that's something we can clarify. Talk about equitable land use and zoning practices in our and development practices within this chapter as well.
But everybody welcomes nice development, beautiful things, and some of these older houses also have a lot of beautiful character, you know.
Mm.
You can see perspective. For example, where I live, the neighborhood where I live. Talking about all these things that you want to see close to you that are needed. If, for example, where I live, hospitals, all hospitals are about 10 minutes away from me, maybe less. Fire department down the street. Police accessibility right down the street. Fortunately, even the FBI building, it's going to move anyway, I understand, but police, all these nice things you want to do, transit, the city, even this building's only what, 5 minutes from my house. But gentrification does take its toll.
Yeah. I totally
But
agree.
you will be making suggestions or something like that.
Yes, we have, we will, we do. We'll
And
have-
use the word. I mean, I see all these, that it's incorporated in some of this language here, but
Yeah, it is in there. And we'll enhance it in that particular recommendation to make sure.
not just in my neighborhood, but other neighborhoods will be interested to see what is proposed.
Can I ask just a clarifying question? What committee or is it the council that approves, like, I'm not gonna get the term wrong, if it's 353 or whatever the tax is, where it freezes the property tax for so many years for the existing residents?
I think
Urban
the council
renewal.
has to approve those ultimately. But you're asking like, what is the outside, like the incentive agency?
Yeah, like, well, I guess at the city. So I'm thinking about Paul Rojas, just the statement he made when those development projects come to us. And there are times when in our packet, we know if it's like a TIF project. And so I'm thinking if it's a TIF project in which it's like coming into a neighborhood that potentially will drive up the cost for the residents, but the property itself is abated, is there a way to freeze the property taxes for the existing residents? I don't know if that's,
There's a procedure that's not easy to come by, you know, to freeze taxes at a given rate, you know. But it's a long shot, you know, it has to come through here. Has to come through the city council also, you know, that is being worked on in some areas, including mine, you know, but it's a long plan.
yeah, I mean, I know that we're not the final approval body, but I'm just thinking in terms of recommendations. Now, the city council can take it or not, but it might be a time where this committee says, hey, we think this is a really good development project. We're gonna move it. It fits the codes. But we also understand when you get a lot of neighborhood pushback about that, is there recommendations or will we foresee a place where we make a recommendation the council would consider? That's really all I'm saying. Like, can we do that or can we not do that if such a project were to happen?
I think it's a good question to ask when you see folks with their tax incentive plans that they bring to you, whether that's a consideration that they took. A consideration they made in developing their plan and the program, whether it would apply to adjacent. I do know of one LCRA plan that sounds like it intended to do what you're describing for a particular neighbor. It was a residential neighborhood level plan that helped with that, but I think it would be a good question to ask those particular staff persons when they're here with those plans.
It was years ago, and I'm not sure if I was on the council or not, but I remember a lot of neighborhood pushback or when Beacon Hill, like when it came out of receivership and it was like these plans. And so you look at the homes now, which are beautiful. I mean, and we want mixed income spaces in traditionally low income communities, but not at the cost that the residents that are there can't afford to live there. And I believe in that area, the council eventually approved something to like freeze their property taxes. So it's just something that we think of because I know that you guys, we hear it all the time when it's a TIF plan, right? It's like, well, what was the metrics? And we don't, you know, this body doesn't get into whether the TIF was right or wrong. Certainly it's a tool to spur development that we support with the but-for clause, but it's what do we do or what can we say when we're sitting here and neighborhood people are saying, you're gonna drive me out of my community.
I-
So,
I don't know how it impacts what you all do specifically, but one of the recommendations we're making about displacement and gentrification is that we try to be more predictive about where that was going to occur and proactively employing the mechanisms you're talking about, tax abatement and other tools you can use to help preserve and allow people to stay in the area without getting priced out of the area. And that's, other cities are doing that kind of approach where you can measure things and track what's happening in the market and the development, and you can see what areas are beginning to gentrify and go in and preemptively, and put things in place to help prevent that. And that's one of the kind of big ideas and it's not something we're talking about with you all today. There's so many pieces of this plan that we're not showing you, and that can be a little frustrating, I think. But that is one of the ideas that we're talking about in a different chapter. But it's still, I think, important what you all do as well.
really appreciate that. I think it's a conversation as we talk about development being more equitable on the east side, that you are going to have to take advantage of some incentives to help spur development in these areas, but also being very cognizant of like the challenge that you have with gentrification. And I just think as a sidebar, it would be really good for us to kind of talk to, or at least get an overview of like BZA and the other bodies that are making these decisions. I said BCA because I always hear, but there's the EDC, whatever, the TIF commission, all of the alphabet
All the
super
acronyms.
development, right? Just for us to come together like, oh, okay, this is what you do, this, and this is where it's going on this flow map, because then we can say, hey, take that up with BZA when you go there instead of CPC. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it'd be helpful.
Wondering if this concept of gentrification, say like the opposite of that would be like anti-displacement measures. Part of your universal development
Yeah,
question, or maybe it was and I missed it, but
it
that-
might have, but we can emphasize it, I think.
yeah, just, and it could be examples like fixing the tax rate. It could also be a significant influx of affordable housing that's kept at a certain rate by first. It could also be community land starting to become more popular to give renters some ownership. So maybe that's just something that like at the top, we're all asking that question.
I think that's good.
And referring back to one of my thoughts earlier about how much control, a plan can have, are you all working with the county, and will they have they provided input? Because, we're talking about property tax, they're going to need to be a part of the discussion. Is that something that like is a part of the process? Will they review it at all? Will they weigh in or help?
We have an effort to reach out to outside agencies, and the counties, MoDOT, Mark, adjacent communities even, so we do have that kind of hopefully review process happening, and coordination rather. And we have a whole section in this plan about regional collaboration, which talks about those kinds of initiatives as well, and the importance of them, and what our role is in those discussions as well. So
that sounds great. Quickly, just from my perspective on all these CSAs, I think one of the things I've learned over the past 2+ years on this committee is if it's not in the code, it doesn't really matter. And so I think kind of how do we have, maybe this is for after the plan is implemented, but what are what are your plans to kind of essentially make these code issues, whether it's bite-sized pieces or like a whole overlay, because I think that's the challenge we run into is if it's not legally binding, then it's more suggestions for people. And I think the vast majority of development interests are going for the path of least resistance. And I think we're aiming for aspirational things that aren't included in a lot of the development community's vernacular. So I didn't know what your thoughts were on how to kind of implement some of these things either at smaller points, or like what's the next steps for making these actually legally binding?
Yeah, so we will have a whole strategy around how we implement the plan, how we strengthen its role in the development review process, what things we want to take and have it be less aspirational and more code requirements will be part of that. So once we adopt the plan, there will be an implementation process, but within the plan, there will be a clearly laid out strategy for how we begin to take on and address these different issues. And it requires champions. Part of the reason we spent so long in public engagement was that we wanted to have a good base of citizen and community buy-in in the plan, which is important to having the plan be strong enough for the elected officials and decision makers to actually want to implement it, right? So part of that process will be getting our elected officials on board, getting our decision-making bodies on board, and try to get everyone sort of moving in the same direction, in a common direction, using the comprehensive plan as a tool to do that. It's always a lot of stakeholders involved in the implementation process, including the development community. So I guess the short answer to your question is we will have a process where we'll go through, continue our conversation about how we implement these ideas with all the broad stakeholders, including you and the development community. Some things we'll codify, some things we may not be able to codify. And I think sometimes that's okay. I do think things that aren't necessarily code requirements still have the ability to be impactful and useful, especially to a body like this, where you're evaluating cases on a case-by-case basis, and having the ability to have some discretion to negotiate in certain elements sometimes is very useful, I think, to you all. And sometimes it comes down to just how much political will you're able to generate through a process like this. And that's what gives the things that aren't code requirements strength. And that's part of what our job will be, to try to build that buy-in from all the elected and decision-making bodies. I hope
That helps.
I've got three quick notes on CD 3, 4, and 5. And appreciate your sentiment there. I would prefer to err on the side of using this as recommendation and allowing this body and other bodies the nuance, because and some of the rationale I'll follow up with on my 3 comments. So on, I guess, CD or QD 3 and then 4. So 3 scares me a little bit. Anytime we're adding new standards, I fear that I think of, the stereotypical examples where someone wants to build a modern house and HOA hasn't caught up and they don't allow it because it doesn't have enough architectural interest, although it's beautiful in its own right. And so anytime I see new development standards, that scares me, because I'd rather, again, a body have nuance. With 4 additional standards for overlay and special character zoning districts. One of the things that I feel like I run into when I see overlay districts, I know that there are huge benefits, but the things that I run into often, it feels as though we're limiting development in ways that aren't necessarily intended. And one of the ways that I think it's easy to see this presentation through the eyes of a sophisticated large developer, but it's very difficult if you're a one-off developer who decided that you want to create a new space for your business. And it's the only time you're going to go through the development process. And I think that overlay districts and additional standards sometimes punish those smaller developers who might not be professional developers and who create a lot of the beauty and nuance and variety that make our city interesting. And so that's one of the things that I get calls on a weekly basis from other people trying to open coffee shops, bakeries, restaurants, where they're running into some issues at some part of the process. Usually it's not this part of the process. It might be health department, et cetera. But the point being, I think that it's important to always view a lens of not the institutional developer, but an individual developer. And then on 5, I'm curious about what those steps are when we realize that the either existing use doesn't conform with the zoning, or if we're trying to change the zoning, whether it's up zoning or down zoning. Curious about what those steps are. So if we establish that the whole neighborhood kind of agrees with whatever y'all end up with, how does that change take place?
So that's the first step, is to go through an area planning or neighborhood planning process and identify what the appropriate future land use and zoning is for the area. Once you have, and then ask you all to adopt it as the city council, to adopt that as policy. That's kind of steps 1 and 2. You could adopt a new zoning map at the same time, but typically we follow later with an implementation process like I just described, where the city council or city plan commission initiates the rezoning process to downzone or to rezone an area from one thing to another. And we've had quite a bit of activity related to that in neighborhoods. And since I've been here, a lot of neighborhood downzonings or rezonings have occurred through that process. We've had less luck in areas with commercial or industrial zoning that we're trying to change to something else. That seems to get more difficult quickly. So we've had a lot of communities, Martin City, Waldo, other places that wanted to, for instance, change their industrial zoning to a mixed use zoning, and or to encourage somehow through zoning a more mixed use development pattern. And we tried that in Martin City. I don't want to go into too many specific examples, and the uproar was immediate and show stopping. So we don't do that very often, but we still think it's important to make sure your base zoning is reflecting your aspiration for the community and not the
inverse situation where maybe the neighborhood wants some, well, I guess it's similar, but I'm viewing it as inverse. Let's say that there's a property owner who's maybe getting ready to sell the parcel or something, and the neighborhood wants it downzoned, but the property owner understandably wants to leave the zoning as is. Is there ever a situation in which zoning can change without the property owner wanting it to change, or does the property owner always have to be?
No, the city can change zoning on property without the property owner's consent, but it's a public hearing process, and usually before you get to a public hearing, there's extensive engagement with the property owners that you're impacting, right? So well, I've seen it differs from council to council, from city planning commission to city planning commission, how willing one body is to do that or not. I've seen a lot of those kinds of properties get pulled out of a rezoning or downzoning efforts. So I think the property owner's desires are often heavily weighed in that kind of a decision-making process. Yeah.
Thanks.
I just want to piggyback on that a little bit. So for an example that I can think of fairly recently is the plausible overlay and the height limitations that were placed. There were a number of property owners on the plaza that were strongly opposed to that. And then there were a number who were strongly in favor, and it was approved. So I wouldn't say it happens frequently, but it certainly can occur.
Right, any other we have?
I was gonna say, I'd do a plug for development standards back a little bit on Tyler's. And I'm speaking more as an architect, I think there's some really bad development standards out there, and I've been beholden to them. There's also some really good ones. I think there's balance of making sure that it's something that's speaking to kind of density you want. Talking about level of transparency and things like that don't necessarily have to get to the conversation of aesthetic of modern versus traditional. I've found, as I've done a little bit of traditional and modern architecture, and I've found that when I'm doing modern architecture and I have a good development standard, it's actually easier to get those things passed because you say, we met all of the criteria that was laid out here. And sometimes you start to see like their idea of modern architecture or their idea of traditional architecture may be a little bit different based on Writing that frame.
And we aren't unnecessarily, as you said, referring to architectural guidelines, traditional versus modern, that kind of thing, within that statement. Now, if you had one of the special character areas we're talking about, it might have some of those elements, especially like a historic district would have that, sure. But
Commissioner Beasley, you have any questions? Still there?
I'm here. No, I don't.
Okay, making sure.
Yeah.
have just a few minutes left, and if it's all right, we go through our final objective with you all quickly and try to have maybe some questions or comments on that. This objective is about how we grow as a city. So maybe before we're talking about how we design specific developments, now we're talking about our overall growth pattern, more of a macro level of conversation, and how we do that equitably and sustainably, both fiscally and environmentally sustainably. So we talked, I think, earlier about how we balance outward growth with infill development. I think that's one of the big themes of this particular chapter. How we invest in infrastructure and utilize existing infrastructure to encourage and balance both outward growth contiguous to existing development and reinvestment and new development in our already developed areas with existing infrastructure in place. And how do we do that while also reinforcing and establishing a multimodal transportation network and protecting our natural resources? So a lot of our environmental recommendations, although they reside in other chapters as well, they'll be within this chapter. And I think we have a lot of, am I right on that, Morgan? We have more recommendations on this one and less time. So I'm going to really skim over these quickly, and we'll make this available to you all. And please feel free to send comments or thoughts on those to Morgan or I. But one thing is about establishing tools to evaluate future land use scenarios and future land use plans to make sure that what we're planning for the future development of the city is fiscally and environmentally sustainable. And incorporating some ideas for equity as well as we're evaluating these future development plans. Are we creating an equitable land use pattern and development pattern within the city? So that would be more of a as we're doing area planning and development planning in areas, making sure we have tools to help us evaluate whether these plans we're making achieve those goals or not. Fiscal impact analysis or sustainable impact analysis, those kinds of tools. Creating strategic development plans for underdeveloped areas within the urbanized area, especially those that are either have infrastructure in place or are contiguous to existing urbanized areas. Those underperforming areas that we need new development or like to encourage new development, going in and making an action plan to help cause that development to occur. Third one is about reviewing our development code. And more broadly, just to implement the ideas and objectives and big ideas within the KC Spirit Playbook. And so there's no specific thing highlighted here, but just sort of a broader overview, looking at those 10 goals, those 5 big ideas, maybe those universal development considerations, and seeing how well our city code supports or prevents those things from happening, and then making necessary changes. Doing what we can to enhance the feasibility. We talked about infill development in the last chapter, and redevelopment and development proposed as a contiguous or efficient extension of existing development patterns. And that has to do with how we direct our infrastructure, our incentives as well, in being strategic as we're doing it. One of the recommendations in the focus plan was to sunset zoning and development plan approvals, which I think we've done. And this is more about making sure we're continuing to do that and to periodically evaluating the effectiveness of these requirements forward in the next 2 decades. Slide. The sixth one is about some of these large format data centers and things we've seen come in and how big footprints, big energy use, low density of employment. What are the impacts? And maybe lost development opportunity. What are some of the issues we see with these large format uses like that? And how do we better plan for them? How do we establish locational criteria and that sort of thing for those types of uses? This number 7 is more about how we focus some of our entertainment, civic structures and things like that in the central business district or along existing or proposed transit corridors. Number 8 is about developing sustainable infrastructure plans, and making sure our infrastructure assets are at good or better condition, thinking about life cycle cost issues and things like that as we build infrastructure. Number 9 is about avoiding leapfrogging. And again, this is about contiguous development, ensuring that we're encouraging development that's contiguous to existing development or logical extensions of existing development. See, this one's just about concentrating our capital improvements, our roads, our parks, our parkways, our sewers, into areas that are contiguous with currently developed land, or that are easily served. Kind of number 11 is kind of a repeat, I think, of that idea of contiguous development and the cost of extending infrastructure, as is 12. So the idea here is that we direct our infrastructure investments to develop that equitable development pattern, sustainable development pattern that we're talking about. Contiguous to existing, infill development, encouraging. Let's see. I try to skim over these because I know we are running out of time as we speak. Maybe next slide. And there's no way to read all. Encouraging open space and conservation development in appropriate areas. And again, this is something we identified through our area planning process. We have these tools in the development code. We don't have a lot of guidance for how or where to use them. So making sure we are establishing that open space pattern incrementally as each development occurs, but identifying where that system is within our area plans and where those tools should be applied. And that's 18 and 19 are kind of just repetition of that idea. So we're officially out of time. I apologize. But if there are any questions or comments, quickly be happy to take.
I have an observation.
All right.
I remember something from the past, I think it's, I don't want to give up my age, but usually I'm the oldest guy in the room. I don't think it's the same thing here. But in any case, I recall years ago when they planned the I-670 going through here, they had a committee that was known as the I-670 Committee. I guess people sometimes have a tendency to think that the city fathers or government officials, whatever, do not pay attention to the neighborhoods who come up with suggestions and ideas. But it's quite different from what you are doing here, going to the people, asking for input and what have you, which is good. That has not always been the case. Going back to the I-670 committee, I didn't serve on it, but my oldest brother did. He's not here no more. The outcome of that committee was that they tunneled through here. That they tunneled, it's not very many blocks, that they tunnel through here for the I-670 going across state line. And well, you guys are nuts. Now I hear talk that there are those, of course, their engineering has come a long ways. It's not new. Tunnels have been around for many centuries. That somebody is suggesting that maybe they could bridge that top of I-670 to make green space for downtown. Tunnel would have taken care of all that. And the houses that were there would have still been there, or maybe newer ones. But it's just,
Yeah, the cost of doing the wrong thing is like,
I'll leave it right
so
there.
you did it right the first time.
Right, I think
I do have one question, since the focus plan was created, we now have a lot of new technologies in terms of mapping the city. All the patterns we have there require pretty complex evaluation. And I wonder if you're thinking of any sort of software solution or something like that that allows you to quickly evaluate some of those criteria.
we have a smart cities chapter, which talks about how to use softwares and models of the city, right, to help us quickly evaluate changes. Maybe even using real-time data to evaluate things that are happening and to model future patterns and things like that. So that's one idea, that the whole digital twin idea is something we're talking about. We definitely, I think, want to have something to help us evaluate development patterns from an environmental and equitable standpoint, a sustainable standpoint as well. So that would probably be a software tool that we would use for that. And I know there are a variety of those that exist. We are not endorsing anything specific, but we need some kind of a tool to help us make those evaluations. It's probably a software tool. Yeah.
I feel like that would be to housing climate conversation. Folks outside of City Hall, I know in the work that I do, I'm constantly looking for better data. So I could see there being bigger effort around that. Federal grant efforts and things that would all of us.
Yeah.
I have one last thought. So in terms of, you mentioned earlier, the idea of, carrot or stick, and in my view, the most part, a plan is going to restrict certain types of things. And so therefore it's mainly guidelines, guide rails, et cetera. It's not necessarily incenting, and it, doesn't really have the direct power to do so. And so in my, I guess maybe naive or limited view of what's possible, I kind of feel as though the best way to create the cities that I think a lot of the commission talks about, I feel is to allow for other types of developers to enter the space, meaning creating an easier path for smaller developers. I don't think that by restricting more and more, we'll be able to achieve this scale of development we need. Because there's a limited number of developers who are able to produce at scale. And so this is why I think it's naive, because it's probably you need so many small developers. But I think about whether it's like a Prospero's Books on 39th Street. The only reason that place exists is because they own the property. It wouldn't have survived multiple different economic cycles. And when the cost of development is so high, small businesses can't develop their own spaces. And so if you're always relying on developers to develop the space, well, then you get the same shells. You get the same owners who are fine to kick someone out as soon as they go bad on their rent for a short period of time. And you don't allow for unique places that hold community character to survive. And so again, it might be naive because there may be too few businesses that are willing to, but what I would love to see, because a comprehensive plan can only do so much, is if it created a path that made it easier for people who might have thought that's too difficult, it's too hard. I've heard too many horror stories. I don't have the money. I can't pay expensive architecture firms. Kind of carving out space and a path and emboldening those people and companies to also develop, because I think those are the ones that create, maybe it's only a 2,000 square foot coffee shop, but that ends up adding a whole lot of value to the community. Even though another developer might have put in a 12,000 square foot space with 4 other, uses. So that would be something that would really excite me about the plan, is if it kind of, I realize it's tough to be that holistic, but also adding that nuance for less established development groups.
Two responses to that. One would be, we're going to create what we're calling a user guide. And you mentioned just establishing a path for a small developer, perhaps, who wants to try to do something, but is a little scared or uncertain. So we are going to create a user's guide that helps people navigate the plan typically. But maybe, maybe one of those users could be all developer. Maybe not just help them navigate the plan, but maybe the development process, and that'll be a post-plan adoption item, but it is something we're already working on. The other part of that, and this is a small thing, I think, but in one of our objectives, I think it might be our business attraction and retention, maybe elsewhere. Talk about the need to create more smaller spaces and not large footprints. Even if it's not the small developer who's building it, the big developer comes in and can create spaces that can accommodate the smaller businesses, and some people don't need. So we're trying to increase that supply, that inventory to help smaller businesses.
Right, yeah, and I love when I'm sure there's more of this that exists, but I love when I run into situations where I realize there's nuance between the scale of a project, whether it's, 40 units or more, or whether it's the size of something, whether it comes through one process or another. And I think as much as that can be done without it confusing the system is a real positive.
I think that I just want to elevate that. Get more small folks who are interested in start a business mindset of starting a business and also opening, and that would be those have that ability. The same way we talk about it all the time about home ownership. To really elevate that as an opportunity for them long term. And I don't know if that's like a partnership chamber or let's normalize. I can think of another place like that.
Yeah, another example besides just customer facing retail, if you think about whether it's a dental office or a law firm or a construction firm, in parts of the city, they build their own building and they inhabit it. But now if you look at new development, it's just office parks where it's the same type of building and you're not going to own it. And if you do, it's going to be through a different type of investment structure. And so I don't want to limit the scope to what I've been talking about because it's just most, proximate to me. But I think there are lots of examples, whether it's home building too. So we want to see different types of homes. Well, the best way to do that is make it so that you don't have to be a home builder that puts up 100 houses a year to be successful. You can be successful doing under a dozen. And that I think would get us the type of character we want to see in terms of variety.
Anybody else have any comments, Forstein or James?
No, thank you for your work. This looks good. I'm looking forward to reading it and seeing some of the implementation strategies.
I was just gonna follow up on Tyler's emphasis on the small builder. To me, that would fall more easily in the infill area of what we're looking at as opposed to your bigger developments. So I think it is covered. It's just that it's not specifically addressed in that manner.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if there's someone at like AC Big Care that has a lens for development that can walk people through, if not something that could. Just some takeaways for me. When I first got appointed, many of you, it was during COVID and we spent 2 years, behind Zoom. But one of the requests that I wanted early on, and I don't mind working on it, was to see a development project, which is like an ideal if there is development project in the Northland, out south, east of Truce, just because, like, to your point, we are not as familiar with the neighborhood context. It would be nice to just get on a bus and tour and see what's possible. So maybe that's long time from here, but I think it also helps us build if there's any will of council support. So if there's a council person or, a development project that has really worked well for community, us seeing that. The second thing is I would really just like to understand more how we interface with these different pieces, because I do hear the frustration of small development, companies that come in here and they're like, I'm coming here, then I gotta go to this other, and I gotta go to this other place, and everybody is sending me back or not approving my project, and that's more time and money for me. So it'd be just helpful to figure out, so that we don't spend time focusing on things that's really not in our purview. Because sometimes we do that. We ask questions for knowing, but we spend time in the space that we then learn, man, there's nothing that we can do, help advance it. So I don't know if there's a cheat sheet, quick sheet, but that might be helpful. How
Good
about-
engineer.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? You can just you can just take it. Overall, I'm just really proud of you guys. I mean, I think when you think about the comprehensive playbook, all the elements, the community feedback and engagement, I know it's not always easy. I know that even though we have the world-class best residents, sometimes people are a little frustrated with the city and with development, and certainly don't feel heard. And so I just appreciate the process of always reaching back, trying to include more people, thinking about how you interface with the different development committees so that we can make a city for everyone. That's my, I just appreciate.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to bring up, since Kokithia brought up BizCare, they do have new initiatives that they're doing for small businesses to help them up and running. There was something, an interview last Friday where Nia Richardson had made presentations of some things they're doing. So yeah, there's momentum in several areas. We just haven't connected all the dots so that people know where to go.
You're ready for next steps. I was gonna talk about those, but I'm happy to let the conversation happen. I know we're over time, so I didn't want to. We are drafting and reviewing internally all 23 of those chapters we talked about, including these two, which have not completed their internal review process. So anyway, we're going to be releasing those in batches of, say, 5 or 6 on our website at a time over the next couple of months. And we would appreciate if you all, and in addition to the rest of the public, go to review those as they come out. We'll have a feedback loop there and a mechanism to provide comments directly to us as you're reading through those draft chapters. So we're hoping to get those released at the first batch soon, and then continuing every couple of weeks, a new batch would come out, and then we'll begin our public meetings we talked about earlier, which we haven't figured out the details on yet, but we'll keep you informed about that. We hope to be coming to you all to adopt the document later this year, maybe early next year, but I think we probably would have another one of these if it's helpful for you all, and I think it's certainly helpful for us before that. So maybe another, I don't know if it's another special session or just a presentation at one of your regular meetings. We can talk through those details. And then as soon as we adopt, we'll begin an implementation process, which we talked about earlier as well. So, and thank you all for taking the time today to listen to us for over 2 hours.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it. Is this part of your team back behind you?
But yes, we've got.
You want to introduce
we have,
him?
Jay Abers here. He's on our consultant team. He's been working with, he's with WSP. He's been working on our mobility strategies, as well as a bunch of the details you'll see on each of these 23 objectives related to context and metrics, how we measure success and things like that. We have Matt Wilkes, Noah, and we're all here on our team. They're on our staff, and each of them have been working on some of these individual chapters and 1,000 little details to clean up all over the place as well. Seeing anybody else?
They're
Very
pretty
good.
new to
Thank
city
you.
staff, but we threw them in the deep end.
Yeah, welcome, and
Here I-
appreciate you being here.
And here I thought they came to testify, and they're very patient.
Yes. Okay, if there's nothing else, we again appreciate everything that you guys have been doing. It's a great work. It's a great presentation, and you can obviously see a lot has been put into this, and so we look forward to coming back again and talking some more, and then hopefully get this implemented. So if there's nothing else from the commission, we'll go ahead and close our meeting then. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Hey, my friend.
Oh, thank you.
There's like 5 or 6 people on.
Oh, there are.
Actually, have you gone downstairs to get your badge? Yeah.